commissioners that are here, and welcome everybody to the last meeting of our Human Rights Commission for the year. We've had quite a year focused on learning about human rights in Oklahoma City, and now our focus has been pretty local and close to home, but we're beginning to be keenly aware that human rights work here is affected by human rights work all around the world. And what is happening in the world is important for us to be, a part of and to understand. So today we have Professor Lindsay Robertson with us. Professor Robertson, come on up. I'm going to introduce you, but you can stand right by me as Exhibit A. Okay. So Exhibit A is one of the best scholars and teachers that we have in American Indian law and sovereignty. And what I love about his work is that it bridges both the local and the international. He teaches in a number of areas, including constitutional law broadly, but also indigenous peoples law and courses that have to do with the history of the Native American law. He got his law degree from the University of Virginia in 1986 and got his PhD from the University of Virginia not too long after that, in 1997. His dissertation is entitled Conquest by Law. His dissertation grew into a book, and his book is published by Oxford University Press, and is still pertinent today for helping us understand what has happened in the history of Native American sovereignty. And he joined the OU faculty at the College of Law in 1997. You need me to be on the, yes, of course. And he has served on our Oklahoma Historical Society Board of Directors, and he has been a justice of the Supreme Court of the Cheyenne and Arapaho Nations. He's bridging our understanding of human rights, though, today because he's been so engaged globally. He's worked with working groups at the United Nations in developing the United Nations Declaration of Rights for Indigenous Peoples and then the American Declaration of Rights of Indigenous Peoples. So he has helped the State Department in a number of ways and been an advisor on many of their committees. I am thrilled to have him here at the last meeting. This is Native American Heritage Month, but I got to thinking about that, and we did have some idea to place this subject matter in the month of November because of it. But in Oklahoma, Native American heritage and history that's who we are. And so every day we are in communities that are intertwined with many tribes and many sovereignties. I told him early on, what I'd really like to do is understand the concept of sovereignty, what that means. And so we'll probably begin our conversation with that. We're going to talk here together for 30, 35 minutes, then open it up to you all for questions and answers. But I know Lindsay Robertson would love it if in our conversation, if you have a question, please just jump in and join us. We have a number of people in the audience who have a major focus on their work and their lives in this topic. I'm going to introduce Stephanie Hudson, who's the Executive Director of Oklahoma Indian Legal Services, member of the Kiowa Nation, and teacher at OU College of Law and OCU School of Law. a great teacher and attorney, and we're glad to have her and her brand new Kendra Jump attorney who just started. And Lori Harless, I just want to thank you for being here too. Lori is the Assistant Director of the American Indian Law and Sovereignty Center at OCU Law, and she has brought with a new faculty member, head of their clinical education. And would you please state your name for
Tia Ebarb Matt.
Welcome. So, Professor Robertson, I would invite you to come sit next to me in these chairs, and we will start our conversation. We're going to be right in front of you, Stephanie. So. Is that on?
Yeah.
So would you begin this conversation with almost like Sovereignty Law 101, like a beginning like a description of the concept of sovereignty? What does it mean to be sovereign? And as a practical matter, how does it work? I often think of Oklahoma with many, many sovereign tribal nations within the sovereign of the state of Oklahoma, within the sovereign of the United States. And these layers of sovereignty somehow work together. And I would just like your perspective on how that works.
If I can turn, hey, it's on.
Yes, it's on.
Is it because I put my thumb over that? I hate the world. It's too easy and complicated at the same time.
Exactly.
So first, hi, this is really great to be here. I'm glad you said let's sit down. I was sort of thinking I could wander around and stuff. It's always, well, that's okay. We'll start here. It's always great to see Stephanie. It's great to meet Lori, who I've heard of. And Tia, is that right? Nice to meet you as well. And who's your? Oh, Kendra, yes. How are you? I'm good. So sovereignty. So Valerie and I had lunch and talked about what I could talk about. And I told her, and I'm going to tell you, I'll talk about anything you want me to talk about. I love speaking to educated audiences who aren't Indian lawyers. It's so much more fun and interesting, and your questions will be more thought-provoking. But so what Valerie said is true. If at any point you want to interrupt and say, well, what about absolutely fine, and this is one of the joys of being old, there are no subjects off limits. There's nothing I haven't run into at some point in my career. I've been doing this since the 1980s. I don't even know how many decades ago that was.
Yeah, just to jump in, he has, like I do, the word emeritus at the end of his title. So we're here to just be exhibit A and B on how great it is to be retired and emeritus.
We can talk about that too. Not that we're any good at it.
No.
But so sovereignty. So I actually got, so last week I guess I got to, was invited to speak to the Joint State Tribal Relations Committee. The House had put together, or the committee had put together a couple of days of hearings, and some of you may have known that about the compacting process. One of the things Stephanie didn't mention is I spent 10 years as special counsel on Indian Affairs to two different Oklahoma governors. I was Governor Keating's special counsel on Indian Affairs, then when Governor Henry came in, I spent 8 years of the Henry administration, and so they wanted me there in part because I had helped draft almost all of the compacts that, or maybe earlier versions, but of the compacts that are in place today, and so that's what I was.
So what's a compact?
Oh, I haven't answered your first question.
Okay, okay, that's
so
part of it.
what was interesting though is that when it came time for Q&A at that hearing on compacts, the first question was, what's sovereignty? And so that's when, and I appreciate, because I hear this a lot. So here's what I told them, and I've thought about it a little bit since, and I'll tell you, is that they're really, and so I teach in the Native American Studies Department too, and this is where I learned this, but there are really sort of two ways that folks who are involved in Indigenous affairs, and this may include many of you, use the term sovereignty. One is there's sort of cultural sovereignty. And so but I'm not going to talk about that because I'm not qualify to. Then there's legal sovereignty, and I can talk about that. And legal sovereignty is a very specific term, thankfully, and I can't tell you all of the elements. It's really an international law term, but it has domestic applications. It basically, the evidence that an entity, a political community, is a sovereign community is that historically they've had the capacity to make treaties. And I think more important, and this may just be my vantage, the source of their power to govern themselves is internal to themselves. The international law term is its inherent power. So it's a community that's been self-governing for so long, and it's not that somebody else said, hey, you guys can govern yourselves. It's that they've always governed themselves. And the Supreme Court has held, in late 19th century, 1896 decision called Talton versus Mace, that the power that indigenous communities in the United States exercise is inherent. Now, the opposite of inherent, and this has constitutional consequences, is delegated. So somebody gave you the power to do this. And delegated power always comes with limitations imposed by the delegator. We know in the case, the federal government, for instance, exercises delegated power. It's power delegated to it, and you know this from the 10th Amendment, by the people and the states. The language of the 10th Amendment to the Constitution says all power is not delegated to the federal government by the people or the states are reserved to the people and the states, respectively. The states exercise inherent power, and they have limitations imposed externally by the Constitution that they agreed to, which is why those limitations are there. But both of those bodies, so the federal government, even though it's exercising delegated power, is considered a sovereign entity. So that's not an essential component, but it seems to be the case that every government that exercises inherent power is sovereign. So those are sort of, I think, the principal elements that make a government sovereign. And then you ask, well, what do you get for being sovereign? And one is you get to govern yourselves. You get to do what you want as long as you haven't agreed not to do something, which is what treaties are often about, or some power imposes its will on you, which has been true in the case of the tribes, and says, no, we're not going to let you do that. And so that happens some. But there are other things that we know about, and I'll just mention one that sovereigns carry with them as sovereigns, and that's sovereign immunity. Meaning you can't be sued without your consent, and that includes in your courts and in the courts of other sovereigns. And the Supreme Court has held, since I've been out here, in fact, that tribes have sovereign immunity from suit, and they can't be sued unless either the federal government opens them up to suit, or, and this is really the common way this happens, they themselves waive their sovereign immunity and allow themselves to be sued. That's true for states, that's true for the federal government too. All three of these sovereigns enjoy sovereign immunity. And to circle back to where I started, and this is the last thing I'll say because you got a lot of other questions, this is part of what has driven compacting. It's the fact that tribes have sovereign immunity that's led to Oklahoma having smoke shop compacts and motor fuels compacts, because the Supreme Court has said the state has certain rights to collect, for instance, taxes on sales of tobacco products by tribes in Indian country to non-Indians, but they have no way to enforce it because the tribe has sovereign immunity and the state can't sue them so they've instead decided to negotiate compacts to decide how much the state's going to get.
So sovereignty is wrapped up in history and longevity, and there has to be some sort of long-standing self-governance that pre-exists our recognition of sovereignty. Would that be correct?
I guess so, yeah. I mean, because the tribes that are, around today, for the most part, were here before Europeans arrived. And a lot of them entered into treaties, and the simple fact of executing a treaty is a recognition of sovereignty on the part of the other treaty-making party. So that's one way that tribes get recognized as sovereigns by the federal government.
Yeah. Are there events or people that come to mind to you that can illustrate sovereignty and its effect on all of our communities?
Sure. I'm not exactly sure how to answer that, but there are 39 federally recognized tribes in the state of Oklahoma, and some of them are super big. Cherokees have 500,000 people, yeah, and they're major players in the state's economy. They're major players in the state's politics as well, and they provide services to an enormous number of people in different parts of Oklahoma.
Some tribes in Oklahoma were here originally. This was their indigenous territory. And some tribes were forced to come here. How do we understand sovereignty? Is it different for those two different groups, or is there another way to view that?
Yeah, no, it's not different for those groups. All of those groups and the locals who were sort of had fixed abodes, I guess, more than the others were the Caddos and the Wichitas. The Osage would hunt here, and the Comanches and stuff. But the fact that the 5 southeastern tribes got relocated here, it doesn't mean that their sovereignty is any different. There are things that are different about those 5 tribes. For instance, when they came, we could talk about how Indian tribes hold their lands. It's called trust land. For the most part, except for the 5 tribes and a handful of others who own the underlying title to their lands, that was part of the removal deal. But that doesn't really impact their sovereignty.
So when the tribes in the southeastern part of our country were moved forcefully to Oklahoma, would you say that means the federal government did not recognize their sovereignty?
No, they did. That could be. Well, recognized, maybe didn't fully respect, because they were all removed pursuant to treaties signed by members of the tribe. For instance, in the Cherokee case, it was signed by a group that the government argued at the time did not have legal authority to sign it, and actually was in violation, was a capital offense, their having signed this removal treaty under Cherokee law, and a bunch of them were executed once they got out to Oklahoma for having done so. But there was a treaty, and that's sort of, I think, your point, that the Cherokees and the other tribes were recognized as sovereign entities with the capacity to make treaties, and so the way to do this land swap, which is really what the Indian Removal Act is through negotiating a treaty that both sovereigns will then sign.
So, Stephanie, you're nodding your head. Do you have a thought about this part of the discussion?
I absolutely agree with Professor Robertson, is that it's the treaties that the federal government made with the tribes that were here that this is built upon. And I feel like we get a lot of questions from people saying, well, the tribes were here and then the United States came. Why are we still dealing with these issues with the tribes? And the reason why is just what Professor Robertson stated, is that the United States government recognized the tribes, and the United States government entered into these treaties, and the effects of those treaties still remain today.
And I think of treaties as international law. Would you think is that a proper way to think of our relationships among all these sovereign tribes and state and the federal government?
Well, yeah, I mean, the argument that sort of underscores that is that all of these treaties were negotiated by the executive and ratified by the Senate, exactly as international treaties were. And I even, you can make an argument, if you just sort of count the number of pages in the congressional record devoted to topics related to tribes were the big foreign policy issue for the United States government for decades after the United States was formed. And treaties and war, which are how foreign affairs get conducted, were the principal means of dealing with the Kiowa or the Cherokee or the Chickasaws and Choctaws or whoever it happens to be.
So you have the particular compacts and treaties, and then do you apply international law, or do you apply state law? Do you apply federal law? All of the above? Or-
Yes.
Yeah, oh no.
Yeah, you do. So what's made the sort of federal tribal relationship complicated in an international law sense is that in an 1831 decision called Cherokee Nation versus Georgia, the Supreme, and I could talk forever about that case, the Supreme Court in what was frankly throwaway line, in trying to decide if they had jurisdiction. This is mine, 1831, in a lawsuit brought by the Cherokee Nation against the state of Georgia, which was trying to impose its laws on the Cherokee Nation, whether the Supreme Court had original jurisdiction to hear that case. And the answer to that question depended on whether the Cherokees were a nation, foreign nation, for purposes of Article 3 original jurisdiction. And what the Supreme Court decided was, well, they're foreign, they're a nation, they're sort of foreign, they're a nation, and there's no majority opinion in this case, but there is a majority result, which is that they don't qualify for Article 3 original jurisdiction because rather than being a foreign nation, Chief Justice Marshall and one other justice out of 6 are the only ones who say this, but it's sort of stuck. They are a domestic dependent nation, and their relationship to the United States resembles that of a ward to his guardian. And that's the quote. Now, that didn't have any legal significance in 1831 beyond, you got to bring another lawsuit because we don't have standing, we don't have jurisdiction over this one, and so they do the next year, and that's Worcester versus Georgia, that most people have heard of, or many people have heard of. But then in the late 19th century, in a case called Kagama, the Supreme Court said, ooh, that guardian ward thing, that actually means something. What it means is that the federal government has authority as the tribe's guardian to legislate over tribal affairs, even in areas that they otherwise wouldn't have legislative authority over.
Hence, a history of tension arises from that.
Tension and an odd relationship between
Yeah.
the federal government and the tribes, that the federal government has sort of excess power even though the tribes are sovereign. It's almost like France and Monaco in a sense, where one is within the territory of another, but still Monaco's an independent state, or Vatican City in Italy. People have made that analogy. The tribes are kind of like small nations within a larger nation, sovereign, but subject to some sort of overriding authority from the larger nation.
The issue of guardians and wards makes me think about Killers of the Flower Moon and all of the issues swirling around individual rights of tribal members, especially in the Osage Nation. Have you seen the movie or read the book? What's your take on how it presents that issue?
Yeah, so I've read the book, I've seen the movie twice, and I've also read A Pipe for February, which you guys, if you're interested, should read, by Charlie Redcorn, which I think is better, but anyway. Have you guys seen it?
How many have seen the movie? How many have read the book? Okay, I think
Good.
most everyone here has.
How many have read A Pipe for February? How many will when they, okay, excellent.
Yes.
Thank you. Yeah, so Charlie Redcorn is Osage, and it was really and I have to say, when Killers of the Flower Moon came out, I thought, really? I mean, it's a great book, but why did it take a guy publishing in New York who's non-native to say,
Right.
oh, hey, look?
Right.
Why didn't,
Whose story
this
is
isn't
this?
like-
Yeah.
Well, it was kind of, but also this other great book had been floating around for years without getting that sort of attention. So anyway, okay, so that's my pitch for that. What was your question? Oh, did I like the movie?
Well, just what are your thoughts and how does it speak to, first, that very specific issue of guardians being authorized by the federal government to take control of an individual's resources, money, land, mineral rights.
So the guardianship applies collectively to tribes and individually to tribal members. It's really sort of the Allotment Act is passed, the General Allotment Act in 1881, where the reservations are broken up and people pick which ranch or farm they want. And initially, for a certain period, those ranches or farms are to be held in trust, meaning that the United States will own the underlying title. This isn't true for the 5 tribes and others, but for most tribes. And the individual will have a right to occupy the land, an occupancy right. If that individual wants to own it outright, they have to be declared competent to manage it. And once they're declared competent, then they not only own it, but they can sell it if they want to.
Is that still true today?
Yeah, I guess it is. Although it's really funny, I had a former student who was a military veteran, had been a law professor. He audited my Indian law class. I won't name him. He's since passed on, but I got to know him really well. And he had been trying for decades to be declared competent by the U.S. government because he had some allotment land up in the Great Lakes area that he wanted to sell, and he couldn't. And he would go to Washington, pound on the door, and they wouldn't it's become sort of just a ridiculous bureaucratic arrangement. But back then, it was real, and it was a way to control the assets. And the guardians weren't federal officials. These are like local lawyers for the most part.
That's what the film showed. You just individuals.
Who would petition to be guardian for 300, people, including minors and adults. And then when money started coming in from oil, they would negotiate access for the oil companies, and then they'd take a cut. So a lot of fortunes were built on this guardianship business. I will say one thing about the film that I super enjoyed, and I haven't read any reviews that have said this, but it was my favorite part of the movie, is that they had all of the Osage in the movie talk like normal people. They weren't. I've never seen a movie involving Native Americans where they didn't give them some sort of pidgin language to speak, and it made even in the tribal council meeting, and it made those interviews between Lily and her, it just seemed even more ridiculous than I think they would have seen. And so I give them credit for that.
What's sad to me is to think about the role of the judiciary in this scheme of guardianship and wards. It's sad to me as a former judge that judges weren't independent, I guess, of this whole scheme to get control of resources. It's very sad. Does sovereignty itself protect individual rights, or does it vary from tribe to tribe?
Well, so sovereignty is really relates more, I guess, in my mind, to process than anything else. So you're a government, you're sovereign, knock yourselves out. Now, whether you choose to exercise that sovereign power to protect the rights of individuals or not is really your call as a government. And different governments around the world. So there's no necessary correlation, but it does give you the capacity to protect rights if that's what you choose to do.
So what would happen if a tribe did not protect an individual's rights? Say, freedom of speech, freedom of expression, right to privacy, freedom of religion, and that tribe is here within our state and federal governments. What happens?
Okay, that's my favorite question.
Oh, that was not planned, actually.
That's my favorite question. So I need to turn, I can't see these guys as much as I'd like to.
That's a whole
is that all
row
right?
of our commissioners right
I
there.
know. Well, so here's why that's my favorite question. So first, I want to say a word about what rights are. And this is con law and Indian law. I think people tend to think of rights as sort of little shields around themselves as individuals. Then if anybody or any entity tries to violate them, then they can push back and that sort of thing. My oldest child thought that when she was a kid. And so we would have conversations about how her free speech rights did not cover me. And they really aren't rights that she has that are exercisable in that sense. What rights are limitations on the powers of public authorities. So when we say we have free speech rights in the Bill of Rights, what that means as a matter of law is the federal government is prohibited from passing certain types of legislation. That's just the federal government. In the common law sense, we call it the state action requirement. States, and this surprises people, are not subject to the Bill of Rights, the first 8 amendments directly, including the free speech clause. They only became subject to that, to most of them, through the due process clause of the 14th Amendment, which doesn't get adopted till after the Civil War. And we're gradually, this is called incorporation doctrine, and so we're gradually seeing those rights provisions incorporate into the due process clause and then applied to limit the actions of state governments. Prior to that, state governments were only limited by their own constitutions, and places like Massachusetts had an established church, into the 19th century, because they weren't covered by the church-state provisions. So that's the federal government, that's the state governments, and now they all have those sort of Bill of Rights limitations that you mentioned. Where do tribes fit into this, was your question, and the answer is they don't. Tribes is a decision called Talton versus Mays. I mentioned it earlier, from 1896. The specific question there was, is the Cherokee Nation, in bringing a criminal indictment against a guy who had committed a brutal murder, subject to the grand jury requirements of the Bill of Rights, which the federal government would be, and specifically there was a requirement that you have like 13 people or something, this is the court's interpretation, on a grand jury before anybody could be federally indicted. And the Supreme Court looked at it and said, and the Cherokee didn't have that many people on the grand jury that indicted this guy. And the Supreme Court looked at it in 1896 and said, why do the Cherokees care what the Bill of Rights says? I mean, I've seen pictures of the Philadelphia Convention. There's not a Cherokee in the room. And those guys didn't sign it. This isn't their deal. I mean, they have their own constitution, but if it doesn't require it, and so that was like a 1896 decision establishing that tribal governments are not limited by the Bill of Rights, either directly or through its incorporation into the due process clause, because they aren't parties to the 14th Amendment either. So since 1896 expressly, but before that implicitly, tribes have operated outside of the constitutional order. The word that I like is they're extra-constitutional political entities. They exist outside the Constitution. Now, does that mean that there are no rights protected by tribal governments? Or can they do anything to you they want? And the answer to that is no. There are 2 limitations that tribes have to deal with. One of them is their own constitution. And a lot of tribes, I think this is true for Chickasaw, I don't know if it's true for Kiowa, it's not true for Cheyenne Arapaho, but have simply adopted wholesale the Bill of Rights and shoved it into the front of their constitution. And it's easy, and then there's no question. Now mind, it's those provisions as interpreted by their own courts, not by the U.S. Supreme Court, but all of the words are there. The other limitation is through a federal statute that Congress passed in 1968 called the Indian Civil Rights Act. And Congress passed it exercising its authority as guardian for the tribes. This is in your best interest that we impose these limitations on your governments, and then included not all, and maybe not even most, but many of the provisions of the Bill of Rights in a statute that's enforceable against tribal governments. So there's free speech in there, there's due process, there's equal protection. There's not an establishment clause. So there's nothing that prohibits tribes from being theocracies. And some of the pueblos they had like pueblo cemeteries that you could only come in if you were a Roman Catholic in good standing, right? Which you couldn't, Oklahoma couldn't do that, right? But the Pueblos can because they aren't subject to the Constitution and there's no establishment clause in the Indian Civil Rights Act. They also decided to throw in, they didn't include, and this was, I think, Stephanie may know, but I think there's no quartering clause, the quartering of troops clause. That's my favorite constitutional clause. It's never been judicially, where soldiers stay in your house. And you've got, my brother-in-law is a major, or now a colonel in the Oklahoma National Guard. And he and our retirement plan is he's going to force his way into my guest room somehow. We're going to come up with some kind of major lawsuit, so we'll finally get this thing on the books. But I think tribes aren't subject to that. But they also, in the statute, by the way, imposed sentencing limitations on tribes, because tribes do have criminal justice systems. And they send people to jail, but the statute said, but only for up to a year per enumerated offense. So that's misdemeanor sanctions, and a handful of tribes have gotten to 3 years under a 2010 statute that allowed them to do that. The last thing I'll say on this is, okay, so if a tribe grabs hold of me and I believe violates my rights in some way, I can't say you violated my free speech rights under the First Amendment, because they don't care, or under the 14th Amendment, which incorporate, because they don't care, that's for the states. But you can say you violated my free speech rights under the Indian Civil Rights Act, which includes a free speech provision. And the question then is, well, so where do I say that? Where do I bring that claim? And for a long time, people figured, well, I can enforce those Indian Civil Rights Act rights in federal court, because they're federal, it's a federal statute. And in the 70s, the Supreme Court said, no, you can't, because there's no provision in there that allows individuals to bring these federal suits. The federal government could, but if you want to tell a tribe that it's violated your Indian Civil Rights Act rights, you can only do it in the tribe's own courts. And that's how rights enforcement, such as it is, gets
Sounds
gets
complicated.
processed. Well, call me if you know.
Yeah, and
Let's call
I
Stephanie.
honestly don't want to get into McGirt, actually. McGirt will take another hour. Let me shift a bit to sometimes we think of human rights broadly as kind of a collective right to have the resources that human beings need to thrive, like clean water, clean air, access to education, access to employment free from discrimination, other resources. And in fact, we have two people here that I just want to mention. We have Jake Searock from the Oklahoma Conservation Commission, it's a state commission, and his colleague Marcus. And we were talking before the meeting began about the intersection of human rights and natural resources and other things that human beings need. So does the concept of sovereignty speak to this collective right to have a safe place, a safe and healthy environment?
So two answers. So the first is no, except to the extent that if you are sovereign, you have the capacity to do whatever you want, pretty much. And so if a tribe wanted to recognize a right to clean environment or health or education, they could certainly do so. And it may well be that I'd be surprised. I know a number of tribes have through the second thing I'm going to say, but there may be more going on out there than I know. The second thing, though, and this is to transition maybe to the international stuff, is those rights are found in the document that I had the pleasure of working on years ago, the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, which is, I think, a 46-article international declaration, meaning declarations are not directly enforceable in the way that treaties are. They're aspirational, but they can be enforced if they're considered customary international law. So there actually are parts of the world where these provisions have been adopted as statutes, like Bolivia, for instance, and so they're enforceable, including these collective rights we're talking about, or where lawyers have tried to persuade judges that they're that they're basically international common law and so enforceable that way. And I know there are a number of tribes in the U.S. that have adopted the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples as part of their domestic law. And so those would be tribes with collective rights that would be enforceable within the tribe's own system.
What if the state surrounding them does not adopt that declaration?
Well, again, so in the same way that rights are enforceable against particular governments, these would be rights enforceable against the tribal government, but not enforceable against the state government.
Okay. What role do you think the Human Rights Commission can play in the protection of rights in Indian country? Have you ever been to a Human Rights Commission meeting?
No.
We're new at this.
You weren't
so
around for a long time.
we're just learning.
When would I have gone? Aren't you? You're like a year old. This is your
Yeah,
first year since like the war, by which I mean like the second war. Is that right? It's
Yes,
been 30,
actually,
it was a 30-year hiatus.
the
How long
prior
ago was that?
HRC was abandoned in the 90s, early 90s.
Okay, I wasn't here then.
Yeah.
So this is my
Yeah,
first.
yeah.
This is my first.
Just help us think about this.
Well, that's actually, I'm not sure I'm qualified to answer, but I looked you up to see, we talked about this when we had lunch too, what your mandate was, and I know studies are a part of it, and I know referrals are a part of it. I suppose what you could do if you wanted to do some outreach, I don't know that this would be within your remit ordinarily, but to touch base with tribes and say, we've got money, would you like
No,
us
we
to-
have no money. No.
Oh, we have no money. We've got this swell meeting room. but
We do.
But to sort of, and I don't know what the response would be, from tribal governments as to, you could work with, because tribes will have their own places for people to go, ombudspersons, and to bring complaints against the tribal government too, and that sort of thing, which is kind of what you guys do.
Yeah.
But for the city government, I guess.
Now,
But in terms of research projects, because the other thing to be aware with tribal citizens is they're all citizens of Oklahoma too. In Oklahoma, they're all U.S. citizens and they're all tribal citizens. So
Dual and triple citizenship.
dual and
yeah.
triple citizenship. Yeah, and so it may well be that there's some opportunity for working in cooperation, especially with like the suburban tribes.
Yes. What aspects of Native culture and tradition do you think help us think about conflict resolution? Can we learn from Native cultures and traditions in that regard?
Yeah, so I can't speak to cultures. I can speak to legal practices. And one of the things that came out of the Great Lakes a number of years ago is I guess it's technically alternative dispute resolution, except it really isn't dispute resolution in the sense that we're used to. Barbara Smith, whom I'm sure Stephanie remembers well, and I were friends, and Barbara passed away, but she was on the Supreme Court at Chickasaw for a long time. And she and her brother Michael, who's a Sac and Fox judge, were very interested in something that had come out of the Great Lakes. And it's a dispute resolution system built on notions of reconciliation. And it involves, Chickasaws have a court for this, Navajo do, and some of the other tribes do as well. Stephanie will know all the ones in Oklahoma that do. But basically the idea is when you've got a dispute in a community, and this works best in small communities, the Western system of justice would have everybody appear in a room very much like this one, and you'd be on one side, and they'd be on the other side, and you might have lawyers come up and speak. And basically what you're doing is trying to resolve the issues. So what really happened, and what's the rule that then says who wins and who loses, and how much do you get, right? What's the consequence of your having done this? What these tribes are doing is not worrying so much about any of those questions. What they're trying to do is rebuild relationships. And that's the central focus. And so physically, the space might be a circle. People take turns talking. It's about getting to know people and understand what motivates them. And you can have sessions where you won't even talk about the brick that the kid threw the old guy's window. You know, it's just more about struggles in school, or, you know, all of this sort of thing. And the goal then is that everybody's fine, you know, and they all leave and the community harmony is restored, which is the end game. There are there's a juvenile court in Brooklyn that has used this very successfully. There is a prison in California that has used this very unsuccessful. So it's not the, you know, for like fights in the yard and we'll just get together and get to know each other. Didn't really work very well. It's a maximum security prison and it just didn't go down very well. But these are things that, you know, might be applicable, and Stephanie will have real life experience in some of these.
So the focus is on building relationships instead of finding a legal remedy under the rule of law.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Some of the tribal courts in Oklahoma, there's one judge in particular I always think of, Judge Phil Lujan. He's a tribal court judge in numerous courts around Oklahoma, and he's very well known amongst Indian law attorneys. You'll have some young man, some young woman come up before him, and maybe they have a disorderly conduct charge against them. And especially when he's in western Oklahoma, he'll say, "So, I hear you're from this family." And the person will say, "Yeah." And he said, "I see some of your family out here in court with you." And they go, "Yeah." And he said, "Yeah, I don't think that, you know, they'd be real proud of you for doing this and everything. So, you know, let's think of a way for you to kind of make amends for what's going on and stuff. And your family, you know, they can vouch for you that, you know, this is a one-time thing, or that maybe you need a go treatment, or maybe this." And he informally involves the family in the discussion about what's going to happen with that person. One of the things that we run into a lot in Indian country and tribal courts is people who don't have attorneys to represent them. So you have family come a lot of times with them, and Judge Lujan is very recognizes that that's a big power imbalance that exists between law enforcement and the tribal members. So he works to try to balance that power imbalance by bringing family into it and figuring out ways to do it. But he's just one judge.
Yeah.
He's just one judge, and you know, that's something that is aspirational that Professor Robertson is talking about, is that alternative dispute resolution, restorative justice. And that's something that I'm sure that many people in the room would be interested in.
Stephanie, is that drawn from long tradition, or is it new to the tribes?
It's long tradition.
Uh-huh, okay.
Yeah. There's a book, Cheyenne.
Cheyenne, what you mean?
The Cheyenne Way, is that
Cheyenne
what?
Way.
Yeah, there's a book called The Cheyenne Way, which I recommend everybody read. But there's a story in there about a person who had accidentally killed somebody else. And it was a breadwinner in the family, and you know, he was punished by the tribal court, or by the tribal system. But also part of what he had to do was he had to care for that family. And one of the things I think I remember is he had to make sure that they had wood in the wintertime to build a fire and everything. So it's not something new. It's something that has been written about, and that's how disputes were handled within the tribe. But I don't think it's just tribal. I think that that's, something that's human, is to figure out a way. Incarceration doesn't work, and rebuilding those relationships is what is a better way to do things.
Yeah, I think that's right. Yeah, it's in small communities where you need everybody. You can't, just jettison somebody. But there's a big literature on, and that might be something interesting for the commission to explore. Then there's a very large literature on this, and you could go sit in on some of these proceedings and see what you think.
We have about 10 minutes more for the conversation. I just wanted to, really just I wonder what your thoughts are. Anyone have a question or thought? Yes.
Before statehood, the single statehood and the
Do you want to come?
Hi, I'm Sarah Boggs. I'm really curious about, before statehood, the Twin Territories and the single statehood committees and how that impacted where we are today.
You mean becoming one state versus two? Yeah, so that's a really interesting question. I learned a lot about that. I taught a class for years in Oklahoma constitutional law, and we started with the Sequoia Constitutional Convention in Oklahoma too. I think, but I've never thought to ask the question, like, how has that impacted things today? Which is a great question. Like, how would life be different if we had two states? And I'm going to have to think about that. There was a lot of politics involved. Some of you may know this, that there were the tribes in the East wanted to form a separate state. They actually went straight to Congress. Like, we don't have time to be a territory. You hear about the Indian Territory, but that wasn't really a thing. It's just that there were tribes, and they were Indians, and it was land, so it was a territory. But they got shot down by Theodore Roosevelt, of all people, and the reason wasn't that they didn't have enough people, but he wanted to push them in with the Oklahoma Territory because there was a presidential election coming up, and he didn't want, and the folks in Indian Territory were all Democrats, and so were most of the people in the Oklahoma Territory, which had a Republican governor, but because he was appointed, right? But once it was election, and he didn't want to effectively double the number of electoral votes that the people out here would get by having two states plus members of Congress. And so he forced them. They were something, I don't know, like 10 times larger than Nevada was when Nevada became a state. Sequoia would have been much larger than Nevada was. It wasn't number of people. It was really politics. And I think it's created, it's created the world in which we live, I guess, with all of its confusions, right, and complicated politics, and the tribes sort of being integrated in a way they wouldn't have.
Yeah, it's interesting to think about how the history of the tribes has affected the evolution of our ideas about democracy and living together in this country. Clark, what are your thoughts?
On your idea or questions about reconciliation, the obvious one is the governor and the tribes. How did that rift come about, and what should be done about it? What will the end result be?
Well, so I can't answer the how it came about question, because you'd have to be inside the mind of the governor, and I don't, it's true for anybody. I think it's unfortunate. I know, I worked with Governor Keating. This is not a party thing. I worked with Governor Henry. Both of them, right out of the gate, we recognize the presence of tribes here as a positive for the state. Not just in a, like my kids would say, that's what makes Oklahoma cool. And, and a lot of people sort of feel that way, but in an economic development sense, and my background was as a business lawyer, and so I spent a lot of time with both of those guys talking about, well, how do we, sort of leverage the special relationship with the federal government the tribes have, and, Oklahoma's needs, and tribes have enormous capacity to develop rural areas, freeing state funds to devote to other projects. And so it's a situation that's cried out for creativity and engagement. And why the governor, who has apparently decided to go in a radically different direction, that's really, we'll have to have him come next meeting, and you can ask him directly. But as far as how to stop it, I think I had sort of just thought, well, there's an election coming up and there's turmoil, so it'll stop when there's a new person in that office. And I think that's probably true. However, in the meantime, the legislature has stepped up and really sort of shown itself to be good tribal relations. And that was part of the event that I was invited to participate in a couple weeks ago on compacting. And so that's an interesting constitutional development. Back when I was working for the governors, the governor was the primary negotiator of agreements with the tribes. And I think what's happened, because that seems to have been stalled for the last few years, is that the legislature seems to be filling the void and showing itself prepared to step up and, we'll take the lead. Maybe in initiating relations with tribes and that sort of thing. If we had more time before the administration's changed, I'd think, well, we'll just have to sit back. But my expectation, just from having done this for a while, and I could be wrong, is that when there is a new governor, whoever it is, it'll be a different world, and we'll be sort of more back to normal, and the legislature will back off a little bit, and the governor will take the lead again, and we'll see much more, again, cooperation between the branches, the Oklahoma government, in the tribal affairs space, but also more engagement between the state and tribes. I hope that's what happens anyway.
It really does speak to the power of relationships, doesn't it? Authentic, person-to-person relationships where you know each other. And it again speaks to that conflict resolution framework that is so different from our typical legal system. All of us lawyers who have been trained to think of resolution of conflict within the rule of law, I think could really learn some dimensions of justice through a focus on relationships, mending relationships, and having long-term personal relationships with each other, how important that is. And when we think about our work in human rights, protecting human rights of all people, I think, wow, that's the key. And maybe we can be that place and that group that advances that for our community. Mm-hmm. So I so hate this, but we're at the end of our time. And what we're going to do is take a 10-minute break, and then the commission will resume its business according to the agenda that's been published. And it's really, really exciting things like approving the minutes from the last meeting and other things like that. So we welcome everyone to stay, though, because it's important for our meetings to be open and to have an audience, to have our people here and being a part of the conversation.
Can I share one last?
Oh, would you please?
Yeah,
yes.
one last thought. So for those of you who are, and by the way, thanks for the invite. This has been lots of fun. And I hope it was interesting, and I'll come anytime you want me to, or you guys can come and hang out with me and Norman if you want. We can chat about this stuff. But for those of you who are like super interested in Indian law and sort of how all of this works, this is just an FYI. A number of years ago, we started an online asynchronous, which means there's no live classes, it's pre-recorded, master's degree program in Indigenous Peoples Law. And this program we started, it's our, I think we have OCU here, so I can't, but I think we have the most comprehensive Indian law program in the country. And this program is more comprehensive than our JD program. It's like an entire semester of history of federal Indian law and policy that I teach. In a normal course, that's just like 2 weeks of the class. And we have people, really terrific people teaching it. We started this program with, I think, 13 students a decade ago. We've now got somewhere between 200 and 300 students in the program from around the country. Tribal leaders all over the place. About 85% of our students are citizens of federally recognized tribes. About 75% are women, which is interesting. And we've had people go on to do amazing, to use the experience to become leaders of tribes, or we have had academics, journalists in the program who just, or people like yourselves who are interested in these issues, who may not be tribal citizens, but who want to understand. I'll share a very fast story. 2 of our grads, one was the director of the Fine Arts Department at City University of New York, Staten Island, and he turned his experience into a play that he performed in Manhattan for a number of years, which is basically a love song to the program, because he discovered his own heritage and all sorts of stuff through this. And the other is the current director of the National Park Service, Chuck Sams, the first Native director of the National Park Service, who was a 2020 grad of the online master's program in Indigenous Peoples Law. If you're interested, and it's through the law school, just look online, look it up, and email me if you have any questions. And if I can answer, I will, or I can put you in touch with the right people.
Yes, and one of our commissioners, Brian Wall, went through that program. He's a member of the Kaw Nation. He couldn't be here today. He was supposed to be part of this conversation. But he speaks so highly of the program, and I'm real curious about it myself. So, all right. Well, any last words from the audience? Ralph Crawford, you're just right there looking like you got something to say.
I am a different generation than many of you in here. I grew up playing cowboys and Indians in Ada, Oklahoma. And I always wanted to be an Indian because my dad told me I was Cherokee. Come to find out, I'm a Cherokee Scotsman. Now, I don't know how that works. I do know how it works, but anyway, that's what I am. I had always believed that the Indian nations followed the wolves. And I've that seems kind of archaic, but they are sovereign unto themselves. They stick together and they work things out. And it's a give and take thing with nature. And I've always wished that I could have been a Native American, because I respect them and I wish the relationships were better, and I wish that they had a bigger standing in our state legislature than they do currently. But you're a very interesting man, and I'd love to get to know you better. But, because I have some anecdotes that are fun. But anyway, this is very good.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Ralph. All right, we're going to take a break now, but let's just thank Professor Robertson for being with us and having this wonderful conversation. It's been great. Thank you so much. a bit of a time crunch this afternoon. At 2 o'clock, another commission is scheduled to meet here. And so we will keep up a pretty quick pace here. We've got a number of things to decide and to focus on, and I think we can do it, but I just want to encourage everybody to keep in mind our time limits. The first item on the agenda is approval of the minutes from our last meeting, which was held on September 19th. The minutes were provided to you in your packet and notice of the meeting. Hope you've had a moment to look at them. Are there any changes or additions to the minutes?
I move that we accept the minutes as stated from September, that date.
September 19th?
Okay.
All right. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. The next item is consideration and vote on the proposed amendment to the bylaws. The proposed amendment was also provided to you with your agenda in your packet. And Leslie Van Buskirk and Barbara Peck and I are the commissioners proposing the amendment. And I will take just a minute or two to give you some background as to why. And Leslie, please chime in as we get through this. In the original bylaws, somehow in the final printing of it, the paragraph on the Rules Committee dropped out. We had put in a new paragraph on a nominating committee, and that was there, but the Rules Committee just didn't make it into the final bylaws that we approved a few months ago. So in seeing that omission, we started deciding, well, how should we then formulate that committee? Should we just make another committee, or would it make sense to combine the nominating committee with the Rules and Governance Committee? So that's what our proposal asks approval of. Now, in folding in the responsibilities of the nominating committee into the Rules and Governance Committee, we added to the scope of the responsibilities a focus on nominating the vice chair every year, because every year we elect a vice chair for the following year. And when there are vacancies on the commission, either current or we know something is impending, then we added responsibilities to address that, not definitively, but to discuss the impending vacancy with all of us, and then, if appropriate, make suggestions to the mayor, or if appropriate to the city council representative, of likely good candidates for the commission. So I want to make sure everybody is comfortable with doing that, and I don't in any way, and Leslie, you chime in, but it is not our intent at all to encroach upon the city council's prerogative to nominate commissioners for our commission. That is their responsibility, their authority, but we are suggesting that our committee has a role to play, to think about the vacancies, to think ahead, to think about the expertise that we need on the commission, and to make recommendations. So is there any questions or concerns? And I talked to Ralph ahead of the meeting. His thoughts were toward making sure we aren't encroaching upon the city council's prerogative, and I think that's an extremely good point. And after you've thought about it, Ralph, is there anything about the language that we're using that you think is ambiguous or that needs to be changed?
I'll defer my question to the council. I think you've quenched my thirst about this, and my concern is that none of us that are going to be here for a while eventually are going to be gone.
Yes.
And pretty soon our chairman is not going to be here. And she's done a beautiful job of keeping the cohesion and keeping things, there's no wedges between anyone. And I just want to make sure that the city council feel as though they have the prerogative, the right to pick that person. And I think that us maybe forwarding some names or prospects for that position to them is not out of order at all. It may help the city council.
Yeah.
And so if it's very clear that the city councilman in that particular district has that opportunity, I'm free and clear. We're good to go. Rita, do you all feel like that the language is clear enough for that? Because it did kind of get my attention.
It's fine because the ordinance says that's the way that it will go, and this body can't change what the ordinance has already prescribed.
Thumbs up. Good.
But I so appreciate your thoughts on this, Ralph, because it is important for the longevity and credibility of the commission to recognize not only our responsibility, but the boundaries of our authority. And the city council, I hope, remains vitally interested in who's on this commission. And the proposed amendment simply, in a positive way, gives us a role or responsibility to think about potential candidates and to advise either the mayor or the city council if we think appropriate. And through that, we're going to do that through the Rules and Governance Committee, sort of in a formal way.
Good to go.
Okay,
I'm good to go.
all right. Any other questions about the language of the proposed amendment? Leslie, do you want to chime in with any thoughts?
Well, I think Ralph makes a good point, but could we use the mics just so that the video can be sure to pick that up? There's a button up here. I appreciate Ralph's point. I think the thought behind this, Ralph, is very much, as I heard you speaking with Dr. Robertson today about your mutual interest in firefighting, that we all have a mutual interest in human rights, and we're going to have that interest with other people. So I think to some degree the thought is that we know those people in our wards who are concerned about the issues that come before us and that we are advocating on behalf of. So I think that's where some of that language comes from, that I know my city councilman, my tenure is up next year, and I know he would appreciate me saying, these are people I know, they would represent you well, and that recommendation would be meaningful to him. So I think that was the spirit in which it was drafted.
Mm-hmm. I think this is creeping up on us a bit, but in September of next year, I believe 4 of our commissioners' terms will end. Now, that doesn't mean that they can't have a successive term, and I'm hoping for that to happen. But the reality is we need to think about that and be thoughtful about succession as this unfolds.
I think that's an important point for all of us, is that we begin to look, even if you think you'll be reappointed and you're staying a while, is to think about succession planning. Those people in your community, not just as a position to take your seat when the seat becomes vacant, but to build a coalition, so to speak, in your own ward to address the issues.
All right, well, as chair, I'll entertain a motion to approve the proposal to amend the bylaws as presented.
I'll make the motion that we approve the amendments.
Is there a second? I would second. All right. All in favor? Say aye. Any opposed? All right, the proposal is approved and the bylaws are amended. I'll get you a fresh set of bylaws in the coming year. Okay, can consideration and vote on meeting schedule for 2024. We must publish a meeting schedule by December 15th. And so we did send around a survey of all of you to just have us consider when, and also not only the day, but the time of day that we will be meeting through the next year. And Emma, I'm going to ask you to help us with this. And do you have a way to put this proposed schedule up on the
So
screen?
the proposed schedule is in your meeting pack, so you should be able to flip to it. And it has two options. And so everyone filled out the survey, so thank you. And a couple of key takeaways that informed this. Generally, people want meetings hosted at a variety of times, but the most popular time was held at lunch, and evenings were the least popular. Of course, folks want different locations. The chamber was the most popular, I think, because of the ease of AV and recording as one measure of accessibility, and particularly when we have speakers, it's great to be able to invite people in and then also make that readily accessible to other folks as well. But folks also liked sort of the moving around. The libraries got a lot of votes. Other city-owned buildings were also in the mix. So these meeting options don't incorporate that because you need to have a fixed address, and since we've kind of chosen locations based on who the speaker is or where we kind of want to go next, it's easy to amend the meeting location. So just wanted to flag that if you're looking and you see everything's listed as the chamber, it's better to be on the public meeting calendar and then move it. And I think we will do that next year, but I want to just reflect that that was sort of commissioners' wishes, even if it's not shown in these options. Other considerations other than AV, I think just being conducive to engaging meetings, parking, attendance capacity, all of those things. And I think, again, if the chamber is the most popular and most used meeting space, we can sort of get at some of those other things when we go to different places as well. Although I do think from a conversation standpoint and having a speaker, it is still quite inviting. This was great today to be able to kind of hand the mic off to other folks who have experience as well. And so I do think that the chamber still can be conducive to sort of engaging meetings. I think we'll get to some of these other things that the survey touched on when I sort of give my compliance officer report, but basically these two options in front of you, option one, 2 morning meetings, 3 lunch meetings, 1 evening meeting, and then option 2 is 2 morning and 4 lunch, just eliminating those evening meetings. And so would love to hear comments or feedback. They're now all on Wednesdays instead of kind of moving around to different days. This avoids potential council brush-ups, and I mean, I know we have a time constraint today, but I think getting these on the calendar will hopefully mitigate any risk of sort of needing to bump up or adjust around other groups as well. So thank you again for your feedback, and if you have other edits to this, happy to hear them.
So anybody want to comment or make suggestions? What I'm thinking about in terms of process, we'll just vote on all in favor of option 1, and then all in favor of option 2, and the one with the most votes is going to be the one published. Big difference. Option 1 has one evening meeting. To me, that's sort of the big decision, whether to confine our meetings to mornings and lunches or have one evening meeting.
Okay, my only comment would be that although I don't like evening meetings, I like the option of it having one because of the variety, just offering the variety. And then that way we can promote, like we do have one evening for people that can't get off work during the day. So I think for that is just making sure that we're promoting that one evening for people to come and talk to us. That's it. I will be voting for option 1.
Anybody else want to speak to either option?
I'll just follow up with what Daisy said. It's the evening because we have public comment. And so if there's something that's happening, it doesn't have to be agenda-related public comment. So people who missed all the rest of the meetings can come and express their comments to us.
basically, option one is kind of what we followed this year. Ralph?
Does that mean that we can't change, if we go with option one, that we couldn't change to meet a criteria that we wanted to go to Southwest or Northeast Oklahoma City that day? Would it knock the evening completely out of it? I mean, are we able to change, Emma, even though we're on the calendar?
Yeah, we can definitely change. There are rules about how much notice we need to give, but we are able to change. And I assume we'll definitely change at least the location, seeing as they're right now all at the chamber.
Okay, so we're not locked into this, like,
No, I think it's just a blueprint, and I just, as a formality, need to submit something by the 15th to make sure we can get on the, we're adhering to all the rules.
Yeah, there is some flexibility, but there are some, some hoops to jump through. Okay, all in favor of option one, please say, or raise their hand. 1, 2, 3, 4. Oh, it's unanimous. Okay, and you all can't vote, but. Okay, well, option one it is. And I do like all of those considerations about having.
so who brings lunch? Emma?
That is not in my job description. Thank you.
I did, one of our speakers asked me if we had lunch. So I do. What else did I?
Sorry, the motion and the second, who was that?
Oh, I just actually called for a vote on option one versus option two. So I didn't take a motion. Is that okay? You mean
I'd like a motion. If you
okay, yes, okay. I would entertain a motion on what option we should choose.
I move that we select option one for meeting.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, it's unanimous. Any opposed? All right, it's all unanimous. All right, the next item is nomination and election of vice chair for 2024. And again, our Rules and Governance Committee took it upon ourselves to think about this and explore a nomination. Leslie, would you like to address that?
Yes, I would move that we use the
So you can nominate, or, and you don't move to nominate. I think you just
Sorry.
nominate.
Got the wrong words. I would nominate Dr. Marcia Heron as vice chair.
I second that.
Third.
Now, just to, because my lawyers are sitting right next to me, I want to say we would take a nomination from the floor. This nomination comes from our committee. We will also take other nominations. And hearing no other nominations, I would ask for a vote on the motion to elect Dr. Heron again as vice chair for the year 2024. All in favor? Aye. Aye. Those opposed? All right, unanimous again. Yay! Thank you. If I had more time, I would wax eloquent about Dr. Heron because she's been such a huge contributor to my understanding of how this should unfold. And thank you. I just want to thank you for being right next to my side. HRC annual report preparation. There's nothing for you to vote on. I wanted to report that we've started with a very early draft of the annual report. The form it's taken is almost like a overly inclusive list of everything we've done all year. And I'm going to work with Dr. Heron to refine this draft and put it in some sort of form. We will also involve our communications committee in format, content, tone, all the things that they can help us with, and we'll involve our municipal counselors as well. We want the committees to have input into the report. So once we shape it up toward being an actual annual report as opposed to brainstorming about it, then we'll send it around to everyone, and the committees can take a very fine focus on what we're saying about the committee work. The schedule for finalizing the annual report is not set in stone, but we're hoping to get the report finalized by our January meeting, and we can all have a final thing to look at and approve. Then the thought would be to provide the annual report to the city council, the mayor, the city manager, and others by their February meeting. The last item in this section, the January 2024 meeting, I've talked to our education committee about this, and we're not planning to have a speaker or other program for the January meeting. We'd like to take some time to do some strategic planning, to think ahead, to really ask the question again that we asked very early on. Remember when we had orientation in December of last year? And asked, what is our role here? What is our work to do, and how should we go about doing it? I think now that we have a year of experience, we're ready to answer that question in some way. And the January meeting hopefully will be really productive in helping us do that. We have put aside for another day the development of a mission statement and a vision statement, and that might also be a part of our strategic thinking there in January. So moving to committee reports, education and outreach. Have your report.
Is it on now? Oh, thank you. Dr. Herron. I think most of our work has been done by Emma, but we do have plans for International Human Rights Day, December 10th, and we do have that proclamation. It is in your packet. Mayor Holt has approved it, so that's great news. We are we posting the things in the libraries, Emma?
Yeah, so an
Okay.
update on that is, well, first, our great PIM team has helped us get these nice retractable banners.
Did you see them coming in?
Yeah,
Aren't
just
they wonderful?
and someone from our graphic design team has helped us to just sort of welcome folks in, which I'm happy about. And then also, again, working with our PIM team with the city to help design posters, which are also included in your packet, a mock-up of those. I've been in contact with the Metro Library System. The director there approved these to be put up in all 19 branches, which is great. And so an order is in with our print shop to get those printed. I have some sticky notes so that people can kind of post them in that big white space. It kind of looks like a weird poster, but what we're hoping is that patrons will kind of see the poster, maybe go look at our website, but then also sort of answer the question in the top banner. So that is in the works. Like Cindy mentioned, there's a proclamation, and then right after this meeting, as a reminder, I would strongly encourage all of y'all to join me in the conference room back there to just record a couple of statements in support or sort of saying why human rights matter to you for a social media post. So yeah, all of that has happened. Thanks again to everyone who's helped with that, and all the great city staff who are not here.
Yes, we can't thank the staff enough for everything that they do. It's the expertise and the willingness and the spirit here is so good. Really appreciate them. All right, communications. Rhonda and Brian are not here today, so we'll look forward to hearing from them in January. Rules and governance, anything to report? I think we've done that. And complaints and conciliation, anything to report on from that committee?
No, we have not met, but we're looking forward to getting Emma's report on any complaints that we've received and how
Yes.
we're handling those.
And thank you, Daisy, for helping with the Spanish translation of the forms. So Emma, compliance officer's report, take it away.
Okay, I think I've touched on many of the things, just throughout the meeting so far. As far as the 2024 strategic planning focus, again, a couple of questions on the survey that you all filled out, kind of asked for reflections on this first year and then any suggestions for changes in programming or focus for the second year. So I think I'm really excited for January to revisit. I know we've talked about extending and creating partnerships with referral agencies. I think that will be a large focus of our second year. I think there's still a lot of work to do on outreach and education, making sure that the community knows this is a resource and how to engage, and we're working internally to make it a smoother process for folks to engage. And then I think there are also some other things that have been thrown out, thinking about Heritage Months, the city's initiatives, particularly around housing and homelessness. I think someone mentioned online radicalization to hate crime. So I think a lot of things are floating around, and I'll be interested for us to discuss kind of how to create a cohesive set of scheduling for the new year. Okay, so some of the not fun stuff on the forms and the IT work. Again, Daisy, thank you. We now have the intake and the sworn forms ready, including some Spanish translations. Those are available on our website for folks. On the IT side, a huge shout out to them, and particularly someone named Titus, who has been incredibly helpful. We have been beta testing just like an online way for folks to fill out a complaint so they don't have to download a PDF, print it off, mail it in, et cetera. So that hopefully will go live this Thursday, which is great. And so as that happens, I'll be able to send a link to an updated website and sort of show so that you can distribute it or sort of know that that is now a way that folks can file complaints. I have it pulled up if people want to see it. I think for time's sake, it looks like any other form where you type in your name and when the alleged discrimination occurred. So it's not too flashy, but it's way more user-friendly. So we're excited about that. Dean Couch and I have worked on a process description just for folks online, and it's uploaded. Just to understand this process. It's a little convoluted, and trying to read the ordinance doesn't really clarify it. So I think for folks who might be interested in what it means to file a complaint and what to expect, we now have a process description. We'll be working on a fun little flow chart for people as well. So that's all in the works. As far as an update on complaints, there have been no complaints since our September meeting. So again, I think a big part of the commission in the new year will be making sure that people know that this is a resource, so that if they have something they need to report, they can do so. But as far as current complaints, none. Any other process updates? So the vetting process that the Inclusion and Diversity Department has been working on has been finalized, and I think we can discuss whether we want to sort of adopt that and use that as we look for speakers in the new year. I would strongly recommend it, of course, just so that we make sure that we're being equitable and doing our due diligence and researching who we might want to bring in, not just having familiar faces or folks who we know, but making sure that we really provide an opportunity for community members who have a range of expertise on issues that we care about, the chance to participate and share. As far as protocol for me in reaching out to complainants, a lot of times people will send an email or leave a voicemail, and then I'll send them an intake form and I don't hear anything else. So just trying to standardize. There is no formal process, and the ordinance doesn't say anything about what I need to do, but just trying to make sure for my own sake and to maximize accessibility that I'm reaching out at least 1 or 2 times to try to give people as many chances as possible to sort of go through that process if they want to. As far as things in the pipeline, already talked about Human Rights Day on December 10th. We'll have the video recording shortly. So Mayor Holt and the proclamation, that is going to be signed, but it won't be read at the December 5th council meeting. However, I was talking to Karen the other day, and there is an opportunity if we want to come take a photo with him and, the big fancy sheet of paper. So the 2 dates that she proposed are December 7th at 10:30 a.m. and December 11th at 10:45 a.m. So one of those is obviously after the day of the 10th, but I just wanted to flag that because I know it's kind of y'all all work other jobs, so it's kind of a hassle to get down here. I can email these. I was just working this out yesterday, so I'm happy to share those dates again. It's December 7th at 10:30 a.m. and December 11th at 10:45. So if folks are interested in coming down to take a picture, that'd be great. If not, I don't know, maybe we can take a photo or something. And he is going to be in the video. so-
Photoshop.
Yeah. I'll leave that to someone else. Y'all don't want to see what I would come up with. But those are our two options. I don't know if we need to, yeah, okay. So we can talk about that afterwards. I think that's it. So I will wrap up there.
Any questions of Emma about any of these matters? Daisy?
Yes, in regards to the forms, I know Telemundo was here and interviewed me and specifically asked about the forms being in Spanish. And I know we reached back out and said we're working on them. So I think following up with Telemundo if possible, just letting them know like the forms are up and they can probably like, I don't know, do a quick snippet of it. They're great partners. They're great for the community. And so I think they would be willing to do some kind of update or even a promotion, right? Like a small video of the commission and what we're here for and how they can submit their complaints, especially since we haven't gotten any. Like, we're like, is it a good thing or is it a bad thing that we haven't gotten any?
Yeah,
So it's kind of like, what are we doing? I had another one. I'll think of it. I don't know.
So for the first thing, I think that was maybe before I started. Do you have a contact who you would like to reach back out to?
Christy probably has it.
Okay.
Yeah, Christy in their communications department. I know she was the one that talked to them personally, and we said we would reach back out.
Great.
I do have another comment. So in regards, I love the equity and how we spoke about the speakers and making sure that we are equitable, you know, when we're deciding who speaks and who doesn't. For us to consider bringing in or a day of recognizing civil rights or human rights leaders in the community, leaders that have pioneered, you know, the work that we've done in Oklahoma. I specifically want to highlight Ray Madrid. Mr. Madrid recently passed away. He was a human rights, civil rights leader, was a leader for over 30, I want to say 40 years. He started with LULAC, and to me, he was a mentor. He mentored me through Dream Action Oklahoma, which back then it was Dream Action Oklahoma, now Dream Act Oklahoma. But Mr. Madrid, I hope he rests in peace, but the work that he's done and the work that many others have done for the human rights work. So maybe highlighting some of that and working with the Oklahoma Historical Society to kind of get those names, because I know that they've highlighted a lot of leaders in our community.
Is your suggestion to make space at a meeting to do that, or make a post, or?
So maybe one meeting, instead of bringing in several speakers, maybe highlighting some of those speakers, bringing them in, we're reading their bio or just kind of thanking them for the work and letting the community know this is the impact that they'd had and they have had for 30. And I'm thinking of, I know we already had Mr. Henderson, but we can bring him back. Mm-hmm.
Okay, cool. I think, yeah, definitely options for how to spotlight some of the folks who are doing this work on the ground. And cool. I think that'd be good to discuss also in January at our meeting, thinking about programming
Yes.
and how to engage more broadly with the community.
The Education Committee did consider establishing or asking the commission to establish an award or some sort of recognition for human rights activists or people who've just influenced our communities in a positive way. And we want to do that. We just think that's not for this year. But certainly you're thinking along the same lines as we are about the coming year and what would be worth doing. And I think recognizing others and giving, maybe even establishing an award that we would give annually. Let's talk about that in January and see what the consensus is going forward. Do you have anything else, Emma, for your report?
I think that's it.
All
Thank
right.
you.
I think I sense progress in every way through Emma's work, and it just feels like momentum And I really do want to thank you, Emma, and let's just keep it going for 2024. When Emma and I worked on the process description, one of our purposes, I think, we wanted to emphasize that we are about conciliation. We are not a court of law where people are going to come to get a remedy, a legal remedy. It's so interesting to have that come up today in our conversation. But the more I contemplate this, the more embracing I am of that remedy. No, I don't even want to call it a remedy. It's a process of reconciliation that we can provide. I think it will take some training on our part and reading and thinking, so we can look forward to doing that next year as well. All right, we're at the remarks and announcements stage. Any members of the commission have any remarks? Dr. Herron?
First, I just want to say thank you all for putting your trust in me and voting for me again. And feels really good after that 4th grade student council election that I did not win. But this is I want to highlight for this group, you know, even talking about talking through nominations and things of that sort. We did some really incredible work under really hard circumstances. So even walking into this, we were like, what is this going to look like? You know, how difficult is this going to be? Are we going to be cohesive? Are we going to be a unit? And I think we functioned really well as a unit. And this work is really difficult. And the fruits of this work will happen on December the 10th when these posters are out and we can hear from the community. So I just want everybody to reflect on the year, the work that we've done together as a team, and to realize the gravity of, we really did some good things, y'all, you know, and we educated people, we brought things to light, and that's really important in the work for human rights. So that's all.
Thank you for those thoughts. Anyone else? I wanted to report that right before Thanksgiving, I went to a summit. It's the North American Mayors Summit Against Anti-Semitism. And the mayor had a conflict in his schedule, so I went in his stead, and I learned a lot about what cities are doing, what innovations and initiatives they're starting to think ahead. I really think that it might be on our plate next year with all that's going on in the world. And we've heard from Julia Berry about hate crimes across the board. It's not only anti-Semitism, but the anti-Semitism trends are very alarming, as well as Islamophobia, anti-Islam. So I look forward to sharing some of the information that I've learned with you, and I'm going to give a report to the mayor as well, because there were some specific initiatives that I think are worth considering. I too just want to reflect on this year and thank all of you for coming together. That feeling of diversity and unity together is so precious, and I think we've done that this year thanks to all of you, and we can build upon that in the years to come. So any other comments before we move to remarks from the public? And Mr. Warrior, I just wonder if you have any comments. Okay, but I just want you to know, if we did have an award this year, I think you should get it, because you've been at all of our meetings, and I think all but one, and it's so comforting to see you in the back looking benignly across the crowd, and I know you're there with us. So thank you so much for being here. All right, anybody else? With that, we've moved through the agenda and we're, oh, okay.
I wanted to
Emma?
say one thing quickly, just on, when we think about human rights being so encompassing, I think everyone's been following the news, and I think there's a ton of human rights violations happening across the world, but it's also having consequences here. I mean, those 3 Palestinian students were shot in Burlington over the weekend, and I think when we think about anti-Semitism, when we think about Islamophobia, when we think about anti-Arab sentiment, when we think about anti-Asian hate, that really spiked during COVID, I think it's easy to think that our work stops at bringing speakers, but sort of what Dr. Van Buskirk was talking about, sort of building these coalitions so that movements can happen. I'm really looking forward to what this commission will do at these meetings, but then also in each of our, daily lives and our work outside. So thank you again I've only been here for part of the year, but it's been wonderful. So thanks for the warm welcome and looking forward to all the work ahead.
Well said, and we are through the agenda, so I'm bringing this meeting to a close. We are adjourned.
2 minutes to spare.
10 minutes.